Hello, everyone. I'm overjoyed because I have today someone I know well, love deeply, admire deeply, Catherine Hartshorn.
No, Catherine Harrington.
You've changed. Sorry, darling. Catherine Harrington. Change of name. And Catherine has just produced, after many decades of labor, a truly extraordinary book which I want all of you to read, and it's called The Long War. And what we're going to do for the next half an hour.
It's the longest war.
Oh my God, the longest war. That's even better. Oh, the longest war. The long war was good enough, but the longest war is more appropriate for what you have done. I first received this book about 2 months ago and read it with enormous admiration. It's a very scary, painful, difficult book at times, but it's written with such clarity and majesty and deep, deep sincerity. And its ultimate flowering is very exalted, as you will see. So I'm going to just start, Catherine, by just asking you to tell us a little bit about your life and about where you began and what you worked at in your life, and then we'll plunge into the book.
Well, I grew up in a very traditional family, father in charge, mother um was may I start again? Uh
Don't worry, just continue. We can't, we're not going to edit this, we're going just to be together.
okay. Well, I grew up in a to expect my life to have a very traditional role of wife and mother. Never occurred to me I would have to earn a living. And so I married young, right out of college, did not even take time to grow up and learn how to maneuver in the world, and had children uh, pretty soon. And then the marriage was unsatisfying, very for me. Uh, I tried everything I could think of to help make it better. We went to counseling. I talked ad infinitum about my needs and my what I wanted and what I found missing. And it was not something that he understood because he grew up in a family that did not deal with emotions well, and I wanted to have an emotional connection. So we were at cross purposes with each other. Um, I ended up having an affair, used that to help me get out of the marriage, and uh, had no idea that it would be as difficult a road ahead as it turned out to be. My ex-husband then, I had no idea he was like this, but he then changed and became very vindictive and wanted to take the children away from me. So we spent, well, the book is about I was in court 8 times in 10 years, protecting my right to be a mother, and I prevailed. And it made me grow up, it made me find strength and find a connection to spirit that I had not had before. And so it turned me into a different and more compassionate, understanding, stronger woman.
That's not all of your life. You've also worked, haven't you? You've also done your own work. And give us a sense of that, my sweetheart, before we plunge into the meat of the book.
In order to become the warrior I needed to be to protect my access to my children, I had to go back and visit my own childhood trauma, which had turned me into a scaredy cat. Uh, so I had to learn how to stand up for myself, not be so accommodating, not try to make people like me, be willing to have people not like me, and um, was in therapy off and on for years. It was only in therapy, my first therapist asked if I had been abused as a child, and I said absolutely not. I had no sense of that. then years later, a second therapist said, "Were you abused as a child?" And by then it had started to become clear to me that the neglect and humiliation were abuse. Well, and my father hit me quite often when I was tiny. So yes, I had been in denial about my childhood trauma and had to go back and revisit it and work it out and digest it and let it go. And in doing that, found more compassion for myself and also for my ex-husband because his childhood was not a piece of cake either. Um, went had body work. I mean, I needed a lot of help psychologically, spiritually, and physically.
You were brave enough to reach out for it. Can you
I
just give us
was.
a sense of the kinds of help that you reached out for?
Well, first of all, was psychotherapy. And one of the things that made me laugh is one of the court documents, we had to list all of our expenses. And my husband said she spends 13% of her net income on therapy. And so she's dependent. And he carried on about how outrageous that was. And I thought, yeah, I do, because I want to survive and I want my children to have a good mother. Uh, so that was the primary thread throughout the years, is going back to therapy in one way or another. And then I have my body skeleton has difficulties. And so I found a really wonderful Rolfer. And every time he would work on various places, I'd just burst into tears. So it was clear to me I had a lot of trauma locked up in my body. And he has helped keep me mobile and been a wonderful support for now 30 years. Uh, that, those are the primary.
Spiritually, what did you reach out for? Because you've done a lot of, I know you well, and I know how deep and varied your spiritual explorations have been. Can you give a sense of that landscape that you walked?
Well, first of all, the man I had the affair with was a Episcopal priest. So I outsourced my spirituality to him during that short period. But that brought it home to me that I am a spiritual being and wanted to cultivate and make it central to my life. Uh, I worked with ministers, um, and I am lucky enough to be working with you and Carolyn Mace, uh, and a whole bunch of books.
Is there any book that you can think of right now that was tremendously revealing to you?
Well, Carolyn Mace's books have been, foundation for me, and her workshops. Uh, so I'm grateful for that. I'm going blank on.
One of the things
Oh, I
that's so important about Carolyn's work, and it is magnificent work, is how she constantly invites everyone to empower themselves at the deepest
yes,
level and not to give their power away and
yeah,
not to let their power be leaked by what she calls the saboteurs within us. And
right.
I don't think there's anyone who is more brilliant at outlining those saboteurs and at calling people to that tremendous work of really standing up in your true self and creating the kinds of boundaries that are necessary for your true power to be expressed. Is that what you found in her work?
Absolutely. And a challenge to a challenge. Like you can't be a victim anymore. You have to stand up and take
No, not
responsibility.
around Carolyn, no.
No,
Carolyn is not interested in victims. She is so ruthless about that because she understands that victimology damages the person who pursues it because it limits your identity to your wounds.
yeah. I think another factor in my spiritual development was my first therapist used Sandtray and did Sandtray therapy, which I also do. But it's a method of working with the unconscious non-verbally. And it gave access to spirit easily. And I had all kinds of spiritual miniatures in the sand tray creating scenes. So it was right there in front of my eyes because they kept coming back and returning again and again and again.
Let's turn to the book a little now because This book took you a long time to write. Why did you decide to write it? What made you write The Longest War? You could have done so many other things with your time, but what made you determined to get this book out? What was it?
There was something in me, I think it's my soul's work, that I knew I had to write this. This was so traumatic and so long-standing and went on and on. Um, I say in the book, I mean, the first time I had the thought of writing it was I was at an Overeaters Anonymous meeting and I spoke. And it's the first time that I confessed to the broader world that I did not have custody of my children, which was a place of great shame because in that era, only mothers, the only mothers who did not have custody were either mentally ill or too ambitious, uh,
Criminal,
or,
yeah.
or criminal or drug addicts. And after
So
that meeting, 5 different women came up to me and said, I don't either, and I never talk about it with anybody. And I thought,
at
oh,
that meeting, 5 women came up to you. So you knew your story was resonating with a vast unseen army of
yeah.
women.
And I thought,
Wow.
oh, I didn't know I had so much company. Um, and then secondly, for me, those years were so blurred of just trying to survive that I needed to know what happened. I needed to know the sequence of events and how did one thing lead to the next. Because I had memory anecdotes in my head, but I could not have told you the sequence of events. So I went back and I was amazed at how what record keeping I had. I had all of the court documents. It was back before internet and email. So, and we communicated even about the smallest things via letter in the US Post. And I kept all of the letters. So I was able to reconstruct, took a long time, but I went through all of the letters, all of the court documents, and I was able to piece together what happened when and in what sequence of events. And it gave me clarity. It's like, oh, okay, now I know instead of this uncertainty and vagueness.
What you said, because you said something just now that was really important, I think. You said I needed to know what happened.
Yeah,
That's such a profound remark, I think, because when you've been through as vast and traumatic an experience as you've been through, trauma itself obliterates connections, memories.
yeah,
So to go back and try to reconstruct exactly what's happened is a truly heroic act because you discover all kinds of wonderful things, but you also discover all kinds of terrifying,
yeah,
painful, agonizing things that you necessarily forgotten.
yeah. Yeah, and it was very helpful. And my admiration for myself grew. It's like, oh,
Yes.
wow, I got through this.
But it's that's what I wanted to say. I think it's not only that you wanted to know what had happened, it's that you also wanted to know who you really were and are in what had happened.
Yeah,
And that the writing of the book was an act of alchemical crystallization of your own inner being through confronting all the ways that you had suffered and some of the ways in which you'd colluded with that suffering and
yeah,
some of the challenges that you'd had to face to really strengthen and know yourself and turn up as yourself. Is that accurate?
that's very accurate. Especially how I colluded in my suffering, which at the time I didn't understand that. And it took years of, again, therapy and work, trauma work to stop doing that. Um,
How do you think you colluded most? How could you summarize that collusion? Because I'm sure many women and men would really resonate with it.
well, it was wanting to keep the peace. And I kept the peace at
Yes.
great
And
cost.
feeling that that's your task. That's all up to you, that you as a woman and as a wife are there to be the bringer of harmony, whatever else is going on.
Yeah,
That is a wonderful dream, but it can lead to such collusion with dysfunction, can't it?
it can. And the thought of putting others' needs ahead of my own, particularly my children, which is appropriate. That's what it should be. But it got very confusing of whose needs are what, and is it better? Part of the trouble for where I stood was, is it better for my children if I disappear, or is it better if I stand up and create havoc? Um,
That
and there
truly is
was,
one of the most painful themes in your book. There were moments when I had to put the book down because the pain of being separated from your children was atrocious.
Mhm.
Pain that your children went through from you being separated from them and from the way in which their father characterized you and your motherhood. And then the pain that you had to face in that question that you just posed, is it better for me to be with them or separate from them? Those three kinds of anguish all working together are truly mind-boggling, heart-boggling.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm near tears now. It doesn't go away.
No.
Uh, so it was hard.
What did you learn from the long years of writing The Longest War? What do you feel you've learned right now from it?
Well, as I said, my admiration for myself grew. I had felt shame about sometimes I self-medicated by smoking pot or primarily that. And that was always ashamed of that. And now I look back on that and I think that's a small sin for what I went through.
Well, I think,
If
thank
that's the
God
worst
you
I
had
did.
it available and you didn't go to something stronger. I mean,
Yeah,
I think pot is one of the great gifts of the Divine Mother to us because it is a gentle but expansive and heart-centered, isn't it? At least for
yeah,
most people. Some people it drives paranoid. But I think it's a medicinal drug. It's something that's been given to us to help us expand outside the normal story and connect
yeah.
vibrantly with reality.
Yeah, and I did. And I'm grateful that I was able to. And writing it helped me shed that shame. It's like, hey, you got through this, girl. Good for you, however you did it. Um,
Yet you didn't become an alcoholic. You didn't become a drug addict. You
no,
didn't become crazy. You smoked pot.
right,
Right.
right,
That seems to be a benign solution rather than something to be ashamed of.
right. And I think another thread through the book is I had to behave well. I mean, I could have all
Mm.
kinds of hatred or anger or frustration, but I could not act it out because I had to be a mother that my children would be proud of. So
That's incredibly hard, though, isn't it, in a situation like that, isn't it? Because there
very,
must have been many, many moments when you wanted to just boil over in justified outrage.
yeah, there were. And I think that is the forging of the spiritual strength of knowing I had to behave.
Yes.
It was like, okay, you can feel whatever you feel, but you cannot act it out. Um, and that's so I got strong through that.
You can't act it out because if you acted it out, you damage the psyche of your children.
Yeah. I would not only do that, I would give the enemy, the ex-husband, fodder to say, look, she's crazy, she's awful, she's bad. And I,
That's exactly what they're waiting for you to do. It's like yesterday's interrogation of Michael Cohen in the Trump trial. They were dying for him to scream and shout because then they could say he is a lunatic.
uh-huh,
It's one of the most terrible things about being, let's say, I don't like the word victim, but the victim of a terrible situation is that you know that if you explode, you give the very people who have put you in that position every excuse to further vilify you.
yes,
And that creates an enormous inattention, doesn't it?
very, yes. And
I
that,
experienced that when I went through my dark night with Mira, because every time went out in public to speak of it, I had consciously to calm down completely, because otherwise nothing that I said would be heard.
yeah, that's it. And go inside and find spirit and strength and quiet and be my best self.
Very, very
There was one
difficult.
incident that the new stepmother, for whatever reason in her own life, chose me as the villain in her life. And that there was one confrontation we had that was staring each other down. And she ended up slapping me. And I, in my head, I kept saying to myself, you cannot touch her. You cannot touch her. It's like, you cannot touch her, although I wanted to scratch her eyes out. And then she broke the tension by slapping me. And my, my blessed adopted father, when I told him of this incident, his first question was, did you touch her? And I said, no. And he said, good girl. And it was like, I knew I couldn't, and I didn't. And I got through that, not unscathed, but I got through that.
One of the things you just said it, and it's very interesting. The problem with that situation is, of course, that, and especially in the situation you were in as a woman, is that the feminine has always been told to shut up,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
Always told not to disturb the order of the patriarchy, always vilified when it claims its passion and outrage, right?
Yeah.
So, how did you get your passion and outrage out in that time? How, when you were deliberately trying to refine it when you were in court or dealing with your children, how did you find ways to express your passion and outrage? Because otherwise, they would have devoured you and killed you and driven you into deep depression.
Well, I had this wonderful sexual affair. I mean, it was life-saving. It 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 gave me the
How
courage to get
wonderful.
out of the marriage, and then it had its own difficulties. I mean, it didn't work.
You're
Uh,
saved by ecstasy.
right.
Yes. How wonderful.
Yeah. I
The
I
same thing happened with me. I was saved from my false teacher by a passionate marriage.
oh,
That was fulfilling. It didn't last like yours didn't last, but it gave me hope and joy
yes.
and courage to go forward.
Yeah, there was a reason then to live.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and
returning to the
also
book,
and
sorry, darling.
looking back over the whole story, I see places where where God gave me gifts all along the way. I mean, when I moved out from our marital house, I found a house that was not yet on the market that was a duplex so I could have a live-in babysitter. Um, when I was going through all of this, I lost my job, but it turned out that uh, it was in an academic setting, and that one of the deans took me under his wing, and then he became my adopted father.
Oh,
And it was only with him and his wife that I was able to go through these decisions. I mean, they helped me. I could not have done it without them. So
that's so
I'm
important
lucky.
what you just said, because it's the experience, I think, of everyone who goes through an authentic dark night. And you went through this terrible, long dark night experience, which is birthing you now. But even in the middle of the horror and the chaos, there is guidance. There are helpers, aren't there?
For sure. Yes. I feel so lucky that I had those helpers. Yeah.
I don't think well, lucky is one word, but another might be blessed, isn't it? That
Yes.
when your destiny takes you to a terrible ordeal, you're tempted to think that you're abandoned completely.
Hmm.
But if you continue to do your inner work psychologically and spiritually and turn to the mystery will then reveal to you that it is both the ordeal that you're going through and the helpers that are arriving and the new forms of thought and therapy and awareness that will help you get out of it. It's an extraordinary marriage of opposites, isn't it?
It is. Yes. And it certainly took faith, and it reinvigorated faith and trust and love. And yeah, it's a miracle.
Miracle. And
We
your
are
book is
miracles.
really the account of that miracle, isn't it?
It is. Yes, and I am so grateful. I'm so grateful. My sons were over here recently, and we had a
Ah,
big family event, and it's like, look what's come. Look what's happened. We're all here together having a good time.
after all of the horror of the feast.
Yeah. Yeah.
It took enormous courage and persistence and grace on your part to hold yourself together and to transform yourself enough to make this feast possible. Isn't that something that fills you with true naked pride, real spiritual pride?
It does. Yes. So this didn't happen accidentally. This happened only because of really hard work, internally and externally. And it's like, yes.
I want to ask you one question before I'd ask you to talk to the camera directly and just say to everybody's listening what you would like them to experience through your book. And the question that I'd like to ask you before I ask you that question is one of the things that I tremendously respected about your book, and I know it must have cost you a great deal, is how measured and compassionate you are about your husband. You state, but you succinctly and you don't elaborate. You state enough about what happened. And God knows that was terrible enough. But you don't use your book to crucify your husband. You don't do what many, many very honorable feminist books have done, covering similar kinds of territory, which is to turn and just massacre the male. I want you, your book is filled with rugged, compassionate insights into why he acted as he acted, terrible though it was. And I
Well,
think,
I'm so
where do
happy.
you feel now about him as you finish this book? How do you feel? What do you feel now is the role he played in your evolution? You wanted him to be your husband to make you happy, but in fact, his role was much darker than that. But in the end, it turned out to help this birthing process of yourself as an empowered elder.
Yeah. I mean, first, I'm grateful that you see it that way, because it was important to me not to have it be a revenge kind of book. So I'm glad that it worked. Um, and his role was to help me become myself. I mean, by the trauma that he brought, that came into my life from our joint behaviors, um, I had to change who I was. I stopped playing a role of the good little girl. I mean, I was raised to be the good little girl. I married as a good little girl, and I was that until that didn't work anymore. And if I stayed the good little girl, I would lose access to my children. So he really forced me to become stronger, bigger, better. Um, and through the work on my own trauma, I can see that he too had trauma. So it's not that
God, he must have been. He must have been deeply traumatized to be so traumatizing.
yeah. And the stepmother, his second wife, also, I think it must not have been easy to be in her body and psyche, because she was so, well, she was difficult. Um, so I have more, I understand they too didn't choose their childhoods, but they also didn't choose to try to heal them, and that, so they give it to others. And that's their karma.
The chain your life and your work has broken with your sons.
Say that again? That what? The chain?
You've broken that chain.
Oh, the chain. Yes, I have broken the
Yes,
chain.
you've broken that chain of unconsciousness by going through this heroic and scalding journey of coming to consciousness yourself. and remaining the mother of your sons
Yes,
so
absolutely.
that they will not repeat that.
No, and they are not. They are wonderful fathers and sons, and I'm
Isn't that
sure
amazing?
husbands.
Don't you feel
Yes,
that is an incredible, grace-filled consequence of all of this harrowing journey, isn't
yes,
it?
it is. Yes, it is time for the feast. And I'm enjoying
After the longest war.
after the longest war.
In these concluding minutes, just take a deep breath. And now you're speaking to everybody whom I'm inviting to buy The Longest War. And in the end, I'd ask you to tell us how we could do that. What you would most like everyone to take away from this very detailed, grueling, amazing, and in the end, deeply inspiring book. What would you like them to experience and integrate for themselves?
I guess primarily that no matter the suffering, no matter the pain, that there is gold in it. If you go inside and use it to heal whatever gets activated in you, and that it's worth the journey. It's hard, it's painful, but it is worth it and it pays off. And it pays off you have to persevere. It's not a straightforward, linear, easy path, but it's worth it. And it makes certainly made me a better person and makes my life better. And hopefully than others. And I guess that's another thing. I really understand and see how we draw people into our lives that we need to teach us some kind of lesson. And that it's very little is personal. They're acting out their stuff. I'm acting out my stuff.
Ah,
And
I
we rub
love
off
what you
against,
just said. Very little is personal. That's true. There's an impersonal karmic intelligence working on
yeah,
us, isn't there?
yeah. And that we rub off each other's edges and grow from each other. So whatever happens to you, use it. Make make gold of it.
I love what a beautiful way to conclude our conversation. Whatever happens, make gold of it. That could be a message for our entire time, couldn't it?
It could, indeed.
It is the message.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, I
Catherine,
thank
tell
you
us
very
how can
much.
you, oh, my darling, it's my pleasure. How can we buy your extraordinary book?
Well, it's on most every place. It's at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, indie bookstores. It's Catherine with a C, Catherine Harrington, Harrington. The Longest War. And my website is thelongestwarmemoir.com. And you can buy it from there also. The Longest War Memoir altogether.com. And there's a link on that where you can purchase it.
I hope you will, because if you do, you'll be rewarded by a very powerful, masterfully crafted, and extremely revealing book. Thank you so, so much, Catherine. And congratulations again on everything you endured and transmuted and now crystallized to help all of us on our journey. Bless you and thank you so, so much.
And equally, thank you. Ah.